Check, check. Okay. Good morning. I think I'm supposed to start. The bell rang a couple minutes ago. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for having me. So basically, I wanted to use class time just to sort of run through where we're at. Is my wife still getting coffee? Okay. See, it's funny. I told her one thing for her to not let me forget, and she's not here, so she couldn't let me forget this thing that I forgot till just now. But as soon as she walks in the door, I'm going to send her to go do something for me. Anyways, I say all that to say, Melinda's going to pass around a sheet. As of right now, we only have a Facebook page where we're sort of posting updates and whatnot. We plan to leave in May or June, so we've still got a while before we really start updating it often. But I'm going to try to update about once a month, just kind of where we're at, what we're doing, how we're preparing for the field, stuff like that. Right now, those are on Facebook, but I know not everybody does Facebook. So when Melinda gets in here and I can send her to go get a sheet of paper, she's going to get a sheet of paper and we're going to pass it around. If you want to be updated on where we're at, what we're doing, just give me your name and your email. And then I'll start doing that as an email just so I've make sure to sort of cover all the bases and whatnot. But yeah, when she gets here, we'll do that. So if you don't know kind of where we're at, how this journey has come about, so I'm going to start all the way back at the beginning that, well, I guess even before we left here, we started kind of feeling like God was calling us to go. We always knew that missions was something that we were going to be open to, but God never really came through and said, hey, I need somebody to go here. And we started realizing our kids were about to get past the age where taking them would start to get more and more difficult. And so we finally started looking. And one of my professors got us in touch with Mission Resource Network. And really from that moment, we were like, wait, this is us. This is doable. We felt called to their mission. If you wanted to look them up, I'm going to try to go quick through this because I want to save time at the end for people to ask questions and whatnot. But they are not a sending agency, right? They are not our employers. Money is not funneling through them. Really, all they are is a resource. Oh, look at you. See, I didn't even need Melinda. Thank you, John. Oh, okay. Well, it's, you're gone for so long, there's plenty of people to talk to. But yeah, if you want to be updated, put your name and email on here. You can also join the Facebook group, but I would prefer that if you want the updates to definitely give me your email. That way, I could just have a personal connection way to talk to you. So Mission Resource Network, they're not a sending agency. It's really about training ahead of time and resources and connections once you're on the field. And so we actually just completed our training last week. We started it back in April. But this was, when we first talked to them, we were like, yes, this is it. And as we talked through some of this, a lot of what we've been trained and talked about and these sort of things all comes from our time and discussions with Mission Resource Network. But once you're in the field, they sort of still follow up things. They have a regional director, so they have sort of two major regions they cover. The one we're in is the Bengal region. It's called that because the Bengal Sea, it's all the countries that are around the Bengal Sea. But that director actually lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand for 15 years. So he's been a fantastic resource for us as far as just the country of Thailand and sort of getting adjusted to that. They also offer counseling and coaching on things when you're in the field. But for us, that was exactly what we wanted, is we didn't want somebody to tell us, you have to do X, Y, and Z the way we tell you to do X, Y, and Z, but they are our partners as far as if we need help, need resources, need coaching. That was just kind of perfect sweet spot for us. That's some of the resources and stuff. So when we met and talked with them, that was sort of what, we kind of really fell in love with that. We'll talk about some of their methods, but then we planned this survey trip, and we took this survey trip back mostly in September. It kind of bled over into October. And the beginning of this process, if we were just picking a country that had people that needed the gospel, we might have chose like France or Greece, somewhere with all four seasons and, maybe more westernized stuff. But before we started that process, we knew there were going to be certain things that, because of the age of our kids, were sort of, I don't know if non-negotiable is the word, But when we prayed about it, we said, God, if we're going to be able to do this, you're going to have to help us out. You're going to have to make sure that this and this and this sort of stuff. And as we went through the process, it was like God just sort of funneled it down to where eventually through the survey trip and through us praying about it and realizing what our kids needed and realizing, I'm a family of one guy and 4 females, so there's a lot of countries that is not an ideal situation. But it just continued to funnel down to Bangkok. And that's eventually where, we felt God was saying, this is the place. It's interesting when we get into Bangkok that there is still a great need there, but there's also a great network there of people who are working and doing different things. Many of y'all know Gary and Michelle. They are not doing what we're doing, right? They're doing their own thing with businesses missions through their coffee shop. But just the connections through that. That coffee shop is a great resource, and I'll show you some pictures of stuff here in a little while. So that was kind of the overall journey that led us to Bangkok. Obviously, there's a great need there, but it had the things that we knew our kids needed for us to be able to do this. And we're a big believer that God's not going to call us into a situation where we're putting our kids in a difficult spot, right? They are along for the ride, but it's not their calling. And so that was kind of our process and kind of what led us to realize that God wants to take care of them just like He wants to take care of us. And also some of Melinda's experience in Russia, there were things that we knew we needed to look for them, things like that. So MRN was sort of our first thing that we felt like, yeah, this is a great fit. And one of the big pieces of that MRN talked about was this thing called disciple-making movement. And I don't know how aware you guys are of this, and so I wanted to just sort of explain it. But it comes from this idea that Paul talks about in 2 Timothy. So Paul's talking to Timothy, and he says, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So this sort of lays out, I thought I had it underlined. But 4 generations worth of disciple making. So when we are called in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples, the kind of part that's not there, but it really is you're not just making disciples, you're making disciples who will also make other disciples, right? It's meant to be this replication process that, it's not just one guy going out into the streets and trying to get as many as possible. It's meant not to be additive, right, if you're a math person. It's not just adding people. It's meant to be multiplicative, that I train someone who's going to do exactly what I do, which is go create more disciples, and they're going to teach that disciple to go and make more disciples, right? It's just addition versus multiplication. And what this verse shows you is 4 generations. So you have Paul, you have Timothy, and Paul tells Timothy to entrust faithful men, that's your 3rd generation, who will be able to teach others also, and you get 4 generations. And so what this disciple-making movement is, it's modeled after Jesus' pattern. He went and he preached to the masses, he healed the masses, but what did he really invest his time in? 12 men. Right? He spent all his time training these 12 men so that when he left, they would continue his work. And to me, I think that's just healthy cross-cultural thinking, is that I'm not going there to be irreplaceable. I'm going there to disciple myself out of a job. I'm going there to train someone to do what I'm doing so that they will train someone to do what they're, right? And it eventually gets to the point where I am not an integral piece, that if I leave, everything falls apart, but instead, it continues going, right? And so from first conversations with them, I was like, man, this is it. This sounds a lot more like what I think mission work should be. So if you look into disciple-making movements, there's actually a lot of information out there, and so much so that AI actually had a good answer for it. But when I searched it, so there's a couple of resources. I've been kind of exposed to one branch of it. There's multiple branches of disciple-making movement. So like I say, when you Google it, you're going to get all of it. But it says it's a rapid, exponential growth of people becoming followers of Jesus, who in turn make other disciples, leading to simple, reproducing house churches or small groups, often in places where Christianity is new or hostile. And so this is kind of why this came about. I mentioned my director had lived in Chiang Mai for 15 years. At the end of his time, he's like, yeah, this is what we need to be doing. Because as you see a lot of these countries that there's not a lot of Christians, there is this hostility. There's just something about each of these locations that makes it harder for them to accept the gospel. And so it's in these places that DMM and these strategies are really starting to explode and do well. So they make these small groups in places where it's new or hostile, focusing on obedience to Scripture and practical living, not just intellectual knowledge. Right? If it's counting on knowledge, then it's going to count on me being the expert, having to explain every little thing. But really, faith in God isn't like that. The first century church, they didn't have all the knowledge that Paul did. They didn't have all the knowledge that all the apostles did. That's why in Acts chapter 2 it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. But that was after they became a Christian. Right? They put their faith in Jesus, and then the learning came. Then the in-depth stuff came. But this initial part of the process should be focused on obedience instead of knowledge. So this, like I mentioned, this is the book that we sort of read, and Watson and Watson, two guys. In fact, I think it's Paul. Our director knows Paul, and he's actually going to help us because Bangkok is kind of a specific nut to crack that DMM has worked in a lot of places, but Bangkok is sort of different. But anyway, so we're going to have like face-to-face interactions with him to help us kind of figure out the Bangkok puzzle. But anyways, so in this, when you have to try to define at what point is it a movement? So you're disciple making, but at what point is it this movement that it's kind of taken off the way that it needs to, so that it's self-sustaining, that sort of thing. This is their definition: 100 locally led groups, 4 generations deep. Right. So you got the Paul thing again. 4 generations deep within 3 years. At that point, that's kind of what they define in this book as a movement. And that book came out in 2014. And at that point, there were 68 movements happening that they were aware of. So when you hear this, you think, oh, that sounds right too easy, too good to be true. In 2014, there were 68 of these things that they were defining by that standard. Now, when we went on our survey trip, we were blessed enough to meet several people who are doing this in different places. And one of the guys we met was in India, and his is way beyond that at this point. He was kind of at ground, he was one of those early groups. I don't know that he was the guy, because a lot of times it started by teams anyway. But it's actually called the T Network, TEA Network in India. I can't remember the city. Melinda may remember the city. But anyways, they are now at thousands of groups with 10 to 12 generations deep. And this has been going on for about 5 to 10 years, something like that, right? So these things are doing well. And so the question is, what is my role in it? What is the person that's doing this's role? And the goal really is to replicate yourself, like I said earlier. But here are the 5 elements of a DMM. Here are the 5 things that you are to focus on to make sure that you're doing. The first is prayer, right? None of this happens because we will it. None of this happens because Paresh wills it or any of these people will it to be. It's because God wants this to happen. And it's because we just seek to be faithful to that. And so prayer, obviously, is a huge part of it. Before, during, after. If it doesn't have prayer, you can go ahead and count on it to fail. The second part is identifying inside leaders, which I put there, people of peace. If you know from, I think it's Luke chapter 10, where he sends out the 72, they were told to find people of peace, right? And that's these inside leaders. Essentially, these are people who are receptive to the gospel, but not just receptive to the gospel, they're also of sort of a mindset to share with others. Now, I mentioned the woman at the well in Samaria. What was her thing, right? She immediately went into the town and said, hey, everybody's got to know I met this guy that told me everything I ever did, right? That's what you're looking for. Is not just someone receptive to the gospel, but also someone that can influence the situation that you're in. And just like the woman at the well, it may not be, the president or the mayor or somebody of influence, actual influence. It may be this woman who just by a changed life is able to influence an entire town, right? But that's the second thing. You're looking for peoples of peace. Then it's leadership development. Because if I'm really going to replicate myself, then I've got to be able not just to teach people the gospel, but also train them to do, just like Paul and Timothy, imitate me as I imitate Christ, right? You need to be able to develop them to be the leaders of the movement, because eventually I'm going to die or I'm going to leave. Fourth thing, progressive multiplication of disciples, right? When you kind of just draw it out, it really is a pyramid scheme. I mean, but pyramid scheme has such a bad connotation that, we're not like trying to dupe somebody into being a Christian. Like I said, the third thing here is leadership development. But how does that happen? So when you have 4 generations deep, a lot of times that person that started it won't necessarily know the people in that 3rd or 4th generation. But if I'm doing my job properly of developing that 2nd generation, then I can trust that 2nd generation is going to properly develop the 3rd, and then properly develop the beyond and so forth. So that's why leadership development is such a big piece of it, because if you're really going to be able to multiply, you've got to focus on the ones that you do have influence on, the ones that you do have connections with. And then that last part, this is there because we're not trying to dupe somebody. We're not trying to just convince them to believe in Christ and then leave. No, in reality, you need to be able to show them how Jesus changes lives, how Jesus changes culture, how Jesus is, helping to make their lives better in the here and now as well. Because if you're just, selling them something that sounds like snake oil, but you're not showing this in your life and in your actions and in what you do for the community and what you're doing for people in need, then they're not going to believe it, right? So these are sort of the 5 key elements of it. There's a lot of benefits from it. These are sort of the core principles. Reproduction. It's obedience-based. I mentioned that earlier because, it's not just transferring knowledge. If we were transferring knowledge, it could be a YouTube video, problem solved, but it's obedience. And even Christians, we struggle with that sometimes. We got a lot of knowledge about God, but how often are we actually obeying the commands that He gives? It's simple and indigenous. We're going to learn the language because you need to, to really be able to have a good witness to these people that we're moving to. But ultimately, we want it to be simple enough that it doesn't take, a great knowledge of the Bible, or that it doesn't take someone who knows the language. It's meant to be able to be simple enough that the people that I share the gospel with can share that gospel with others, right? And it's meant to be indigenous, like I said, because the more that it's done by the locals, the better it's going to be in the long run. There's so many ministries, so many places throughout the globe that you can tell is still dependent on American influence. And that's just a sad place to be when if the Americans leave, it falls apart. What have you really accomplished, right? So that's why it's got to be indigenous. Prayer-fueled, we talked about that, and then holistic, we talked about that as well. So there's kind of 2 big things that shift because of this. One is instead of me sort of being the evangelist where we go and trying to bring in everybody, it shifts to training disciples who train other disciples, right? And I talked about this when I kind of left here. We have to get away from this sort of Superman mentality, that there's one good person that does all the God work and all the rest of us just show up to hear the sermon. No, it's really meant to be that everybody does it. So that's the biggest shift, is instead of me being sort of the superhero in the mission field, it's really meant to be that I'm training people who are going to train others, right? That I'm handing off, instead of relying on me as sort of the resource for everything, it's about training them to do it. And then last is, one of the other strategies a lot of places have done is go and build a building and have services and then ask people to come to those building and services. We're flipping that, right? We're going to make disciples before we make the church building, right? Instead of making the church building and then going out and trying to fill it with disciples, we're just going to flip those 2. We're going to try to make disciples, and then when we, and this is one of the things that's kind of hard and you need coaching on, is at what point do you start that church? Because you start it too early, you can introduce some bad habits. You start it too late, you've missed out a key part of what it means to be a Christian, which is to have a church family. So that's sort of one of the things there. One of the key sort of pieces of this is Discovery Bible Study. Maybe you're aware of this. But it's meant to be simple. It's meant to be repeatable. The 3 basic questions of it are this. You read a passage. What does this say about God? What does this say about humanity or people or whatever? And then how will I be obedient to this passage? And this simple Bible study, so now I'm the one leading it, or I'm going to train someone to lead this as well. I'm not telling them exactly what they need to do, right? Instead, this is why it's called Discovery, you're trying to let them discover that for themselves. And the basic idea being that it's just so much better learning when you go out and try it for yourself when it's Inception, the movie, if you've seen that, right? It's better if you have the idea as opposed to me having the idea. And as the leader of the Bible study, my job is to just avoid heresy, right? Is they have this crazy idea that's off in left field, and we're focused on a specific passage. I'm like, well, I have to say, though, the Bible says elsewhere this and that, right? And letting them discover for themselves what it means to follow Christ, what it means to do His will. And that, in the long run, is so much easier and more reproducible than trying to have an expert who shares knowledge with everyone else. Real quick, what time am I supposed to be done?
I'll give you an extra 5 minutes. 10 after, 15 after.
So I've got till when? 15 or 20? 15 after. Okay. All right. So I won't spend any more time on Discovery Bible Study then. There's a lot of stuff in there. Let's get straight to Thailand. So 2018 census, 67.7 million people in the entire country. 93 to 94% Buddhist. You can see there, actually, Christianity is not even the second, because in the southern part of Thailand, down in the islands where everybody goes for vacation, that's actually very heavily Muslim. And so what you end up with is, if you're looking at Thailand, you end up with kind of a very regionalized experience. So Buddhist is the majority of it. In the north, in like Chiang Mai and some of those tribes, is where really all of your 1% or most of your 1% is. In the south is the majority of your Muslim, and the middle is just kind of all Buddhist. They did a Gallup survey, so this is the other thing about it. So they're all Buddhist, but they're very religious. So this Gallup survey, they did 65 different countries, and 94% of Thais considered themselves religious. And that was the most of all the countries that they polled. So they're Buddhist, and they're very religious. Right? So it's not just we're sort of Buddhist. No, they're like really, really Buddhist. This is a common phrase you'll hear from people that live there. To be Thai is to be Buddhist. And that creates some issues, because as they start to convert, they're like, oh, so am I American now, right? And it's not how it's meant to be. You can also see why being indigenous is very important, because you want this to come from inside people who are Thais, to show them, no, to be Thai can also be to be Christian, right? So I did this. We'll try to watch it real quick here. But so this is actually a world famous spot of worship. It's outside of one of these malls. There's a really cool story. If you want to hear it, I can stay around after and share it. But Wayne said I got to hurry. But anyways, a guy who created or built a hotel in Vegas actually went over there and replicated this in the hotel in Vegas. That's the short version of it. But so all these different acts of worship here, but this is the one I wanted you to see. So there's this long line here for people who are waiting for that moment. And in a second, in the next video, you'll see this line. But essentially what they do is they write their prayers on a piece of paper, and depending on how much money they have, they pay for how many singers, dancers, and musicians are playing and performing for their prayer. And this, we talk about idol worship, right? This is just all throughout the country. And this just happens to be one of the I guess luckiest would be the word we would use, spots where a lot of people have gone here and gotten good results. And so now it's really popular and a lot of people line up for it. But this second video is a little bit longer, and you can kind of see more of how it plays out. So notice she only has 2 dancers. And when it pans, you'll see the line of people waiting for this. 0 dancers. So this is actually what a local temple would look like. So that was actually, like I say, it was mall downtown, big thing. This is the local temple that's closest to like where Gary and Michelle live. This is where bodies are cremated. So go up the steps, take a left, there's a door right there. This is a big part of their funeral process kind of thing. And then they're pushed in through that door and burned up, right? There's a lot of different ways that they worship Buddha and stuff. This is the king from The King and I forget his like real life name, but they actually really like this guy, so he's in their temple there, and they worship him. Big thing there is what day you were born, not date, but day. So like you were born on a Wednesday. And so a lot of places will have 7 options for your choice of worship. And if you were born on a Wednesday, you go to the one that was for Wednesday-born people, and you do that. Anyways, lots of stuff here I'm having to breeze through really quick. But, oh yeah, tree spirits. They believe in tree spirits, so a lot of times you'll see these like bands around it. And then the last thing are these spirit houses. These are everywhere. So one thing, I do want to share this. So Buddhism is kind of like a blanket. That really, to be Buddhist, you can have a lot of other practices underneath the shell of Buddhism. So one of the things that they use to describe it is, so in Thailand, the chair, so imagine taking this blanket and putting it over a chair. The blanket is Buddhism, but the chair in Thailand is animism. So when you look at their religion, what you're really seeing is animistic practices everywhere. This is not Buddhism. This is animism. They believe that when their relatives die, they live in these spirit houses and they have to go and like take care of their relatives or else bad things are going to happen to them. Right? That's animism. That's not Buddhism. But their flavor of Buddhism wraps around this. And so when you convert people to Christianity, one of the common pitfalls is that they are Christian, but they still got a lot of Buddhist practices, because this is just sort of how Buddhism is viewed. The church here, I'm going to read this. For the very beginning, church growth in Thailand has been slow. Theologian, blah, 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 reported that 18 years of hard labor by 22 American-born missionaries in 1831 to 1848 did not result in a single Thai convert. The Presbyterians had to labor 19 years from 1840 to 1859 before they saw their first convert. The American Baptists, 30 years of unforgettable work in Bangkok, only yielded 45 converts, most of whom were actually Chinese. Even today, the population of Christians has risen to barely 1%, but if you count Catholics and Protestants together. So I mentioned this earlier, but the majority of it is Catholic. I think 0.3 is the best estimate for Protestantism, but most of that, even that, is in the north. So Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, these are actually really popular spots for Christians to live, but most of their ministries are focused on hill tribes and not even the local Thais themselves. But then you go to a city like Bangkok and it's just much, much less. Let's see here. I mentioned that. The Thai church is growing. I forget which year that article was, but they say it's growing at 4.2%, which if you got very little, doesn't look like it's a lot, but it is happening. This is the first Church of Christ planted in Bangkok. I think it was planted back in the 70s, 80s, something like that. Now there's two, not because the second one was planted, but because this one had a split. But that is it for the Church of Christ in Bangkok. Really nice family there. He's the preacher of the congregation there, the Samprasong congregation. We were able to meet them on our survey trip. I mentioned there's a great network of people doing work. This is a regular Bible study that Gary has with other missionary ministers in the Bangkok area. There's a lot of good work happening there. It's just, all different sorts of ministries. It's not necessarily all doing what we're doing. They also had this conference where people who have lived there 10 plus years got to talk to people like us who have not lived there very long and share some wisdom. That was really helpful. So I wanted to share this. This is the last thing. So the population of Bangkok, the actual city popular, or whatever, is 11.4 million. That's in an area of 605 square miles. The closest city to that would be Houston. Houston is the most populous city in Texas and the fourth most in the United States of America. Same area, 2.3 million people. So you can just see how many more people are in Bangkok than even our biggest cities in America. I think New York is like 9 million, and I don't know if that's the city proper or if that's the metropolitan area. If you include the metropolitan area, I forgot. Yeah, so if you wanted to get the same number of people in Houston as Bangkok, you would have to take all of the people in Kentucky and all the people of Tennessee, put them in the same area as Houston. Now you've got an idea for how many is in Bangkok. Okay, so 2 whole states worth of people in the area of the size of Houston. If you take the bigger area, it's actually 17.4 million people. That is 25% of Thailand's population. A quarter of the people live in or around Bangkok. Now, there's a lot of interesting reasons for that that I could share, but I don't have time. But anyways, 25% of all Thais live in or around Bangkok. And so that's why, I mean, we really didn't want to live in a big city where it's really hot, but a quarter of your people are there. For the state comparison, essentially you'd have to throw in Alabama as well. So Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, all 3 states worth of people in and around Bangkok, the city. Their malls are ridiculous. So if you ever need a reason to come visit us, if you like malls, they're like 7-8 stories worth of mall. The top floor is always a movie theater that is way more posh, if you understand that word, or bougie than any of our movie theaters ever are. They had one with beds in it. If you've seen it on Facebook, we posted a picture. Like you can watch a movie in a queen bed. But this is just part of their mall. You can count like 4 or 5 floors there. They're really crazy. And it's like here where we have Walgreens with CVS across the street. That's how their malls are. They have a mall, and then right across the street, a different brand of mall, and they're both 7 floors big. It's really, like I say, a quarter of their population lives in Bangkok, so you can understand why. This is also part of the population. So this slum is famous, world famous. It's right outside the port of Bangkok, and it's so densely packed that this is why trafficking happens in Bangkok. It's not people being taken from Bangkok, it's them coming through Bangkok. So they bring them into the port. This city's so tightly packed, they can make them disappear and stay disappeared until their ship comes to take them to somewhere else. So when you read about Thailand having a lot of trafficking, that is a big reason for it. All right. I left y'all 30 seconds for questions. So there's a lot of dynamics in an honor-shame culture that would take way too long for me to explain in the 30 seconds that I have. But it's not like music versus not music. More often, it's because somebody lost face. If you understand that frame, that's actually the Thai phrase for honor-shame. But like somebody lost face, and there was no kind of coming back from that, and so they just worship separately now.
What's your Facebook page?
It's so every tribe, every tongue is the name. I think that's the first part of the name, and then it's Helton's cross-cultural ministry. Yeah, every tribe, every tongue. And then if you sign up for the email, I'll be sure to put a link in there to the Facebook as well.
How long is your commitment to be over?
So we don't have a, MRN's not a sending organization, so we don't have an official commitment, but everything we've heard is you can't accomplish anything in less than 3 years. So we're there for at least 3 years just to see if we can gain traction to make anything happen.
Is MRN the one who organizes or to whom people send support, or is that like you have a supporting church or?
So that's a good point. I think I can say this. Corey, Jeff, am I allowed to say this? The idea is that Alvaton would be our sending congregation. That's part of why we're here, to make sure that everything's kind of good to go there. One of the things that I know from talking to the elders, what they want is they want somebody to be a point of contact for us. So what they're trying to work towards with their mission efforts is that every effort has a point of contact, so that, there's a lot of reasons for this, but it's just better communication with us in the field, and it's also better for having an advocate here in the congregation that specifically we work with. And I told them this, and I'll tell y'all this: whoever that is, we want you to come and visit, because you really can't understand the work until you come and you feet on the ground, see what's going on. But that is something that they're praying for, and I'm praying for, that somebody here would feel called enough to this work that you would be our point of contact. That we want plenty of people praying for us. Like I said, nothing happens by our volition; it's all God's. So prayer is going to be a big point of this as well. So, any other questions?
You said they split over losing faith. Do they struggle with the idea of forgiving people, like with the Christian?
No, so, in America, forgiveness is easy. We can just throw out a word. In an honor-shame culture, once someone has been shamed, it's immediately a breach of relationship. And so by someone being shamed, inadvertently or advertently, the relationship's already broken, and sorry isn't enough to fix it. And so there has to be a restoration of honor, which Jesus does that. I mean, Jesus does that plenty of times throughout Scripture. But sometimes, and you know this in church dynamics, sometimes sorry and all this kind of stuff is just not enough. And this, I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know exactly how it played out, but this is just what I was told in sort of my short time of trying to understand what's going on there. All right, I know I'm over time. I can stand up here really until about 12:30 and answer questions. So if anybody wants to come ask a question of me, I'll hang out up here and answer whatever I can answer. Thanks for listening. Thank y'all for letting me go over time and all that and ramble like I do. So appreciate y'all.